Okay, this is the second of our presentation this afternoon. It's going to be made by myself and also by Chris Mandelaris. There are going to be three components to this presentation. We're going to talk about personal budgeting, parish budgeting, and then Chris is also going to speak to us on financials. I gave to you a handout. So much of what I'm going to say is contained on this handout. You might want to refer to it. The first thing we need to do in terms of talking about personal budgeting is we have to understand what a budget is. And this is budgeting, personal budgeting 101. So what we have here is a budget, by definition, is a quantitative expression of a financial plan for a definite period of time. I point out that budgets are important because they are successful ways of keeping track of one's monies. The reason so many people, clergy and laity alike, get into trouble financially is because we do not keep track of our monies. Budgeting is very important for businesses, for churches, for families, for individuals. You may be wondering why it is that I myself am making this particular presentation. What makes me an expert in personal budgeting? I don't know why I'm making this presentation. I attended the Metropolis Council yesterday, and I listened to Father Mark Leondis, Father Tom Harris, and several others talk about and reflect upon the budget of the Metropolis. And in listening to them, my thinking was they have financial acumen, and these are the individuals who should have been asked to give this presentation.
But you're better looking.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that. But what they all have in common is that they are successful by God's grace as priests. They are dedicated to the church. They are pastors of large parish. And they are also ugly. So when you say I'm better looking, perhaps that's the reason why I'm making a presentation today. Allow me just to say a word about personal budgeting and where and from whom I learned how to budget personally. I learned it from my father of blessed memory. He died in the year 2002. My father was an immigrant from Greece. He came to the United States in 1929. He got married in 1936. He operated a restaurant. And growing up, he taught me three fundamental things about personal budgeting. The one thing he taught me about was the importance of saving. Tom and Father Dimitri and others alluded to the importance of saving to being financially solvent in this life. The lesson, interestingly, was reaffirmed in my own personal life through the Cumberland Valley Savings and Loan Association, which was a bank in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the Cumberland Valley and Savings Association of Carlisle had a savings program through our elementary school. We were encouraged to save. Save your dimes was the motto, and watch your dollars grow. We're going back many years now. So every week, my dad would give me a quarter, and I would deposit in the Cumberland Valley Savings and Loan Association. And by the time I finished 6th grade, I had over $100 in the bank, and I was really proud of that amount of money.
Back then was how much today?
Well, probably close to 1,000, I would imagine. The second lesson he taught me was a lesson that I think we all have learned very well, and George pointed it out. He taught me about the importance of work, having a good work ethic. We clergy are not afraid of working. My dad taught me to work, of course, in the restaurant. Working was not an option, but it was a prerogative. And the final lesson that he taught me was no cash, no carry. Now, what does that mean? That means my dad died at the age of 90 years old. He never bought anything if he didn't have the money with which to buy it. He did not know anything about credit cards. He knew about credit cards, but he just never had one. And quite honestly, I never had a credit card myself until about 15, 20 years ago when the dollar really amounted to very little. and we needed credit cards to negotiate business. So these are the 3 lessons that I've learned about personal budgeting. Now, why do we have to learn about personal budgeting? And allow me to point out again some of the statistics that George so beautifully and articulately pointed out to us that drive our need to be better managers of the money that we receive both through our work and through the second income of our presbyteros, if in fact our presbyteros are working. Now these statistics, of course, are frightening. He pointed out that 53% of clergy have less than $49,000 in retirement savings. 70% of our clergy have less than $19,000 in personal savings, and 28% of us have no savings whatsoever. That means 1 out of every 4 priests in our metropolis has no savings whatsoever. 59% of our clergy have less than 5% of take-home pay. 53% have non-mortgage debt of $5,000 to $50,000 or more. And as we noted in the statistics that were shared by George Koulianos, there are several clergy who have over $100,000 in student debt. So the question is, why is personal budgeting so important? And I cite some of the reasons why. 1, personal budgeting makes good financial sense. If we do personal budgeting and we live within a budget, I can assure you that we are going to feel better about ourselves. We're going to acquire, procure a sense of self-confidence. When we have self-confidence and a sense of equanimity about our financial state in life, we in turn are going to be more effective priests. And one thing that Dr. Koulianos pointed out in this presentation is that finances really do impact upon our effectiveness as clergy. This is something that we ourselves have to be aware of, and our parishes also, and our metropolis and our archdiocese also have to be aware of that factor as well. It also makes good financial sense, and allow me to share this quote with you from Proverbs. Proverbs says, "The rich shall rule over the poor." Now, President Trump yesterday said something like that yesterday in his comments in Iowa, that he would never appoint a poor person to head his Department of Finance or whatever the department was. But Proverbs says, "The rich shall rule over the poor, and the borrower shall always be enslaved to the lender." The borrower shall always be enslaved to the lender. Which means, of course, if we're going to continue to borrow and utilize our credit card and pay high interest, we're always going to be enslaved to the lender. Now, another reason why budgeting is important, because it is consistent with what we know about stewardship. We oftentimes talk about stewardship as being a sharing of our time, talents, and treasures with God through the church, but it's much more than that. Biblical stewardship has to do with management of finances. Everything that we have, biblically speaking, theologically speaking, comes to us from God. Now, if we go to the concept of the tithe, we know the teaching, of course, is we share a portion of that income with God through the church, but then the other 90% or more or less comes to us. It is of paramount importance that we be good managers of the goods that God has given to us. And then the final component about budgeting and why it is so important is that it gives one a sense of peace of mind. The reality is, and one thing that convicted me when I heard this presentation today, and I was also part of that presentation when a Committee on Clergy Initiative met in New York with His Eminence Archbishop Demetrius in December, one of the points that I got was that if we are not living within our budget, if we have tremendous debt, there is stress in our life. I know all of you counsel people premaritally. And one of the things that we do, I hope you do it as well, is talk about finances. Because the reality is that one of the greatest detractors of a happy marriage, a harmonious marriage, is finances. when there is financial stress in the life of the priest, there is also financial stress in the life of the presbytera and in the life of the children as well. And it has also been demonstrated that financial stress also has an impact upon what people do. Suicide, one of the leading causes of suicide in people, and I don't believe this is problematic among clergy, but one of the reasons a number of people commit suicide, of course, is because of the financial burdens that they carry on in life. So stress is a factor when we are not financially solvent. So let's talk a little bit about Christian budgeting. Now, from the book of Proverbs, again, we refer to our notes. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to want. So what is a budget? A budget is nothing more than a plan for saving and spending money. It includes where the money will come from. We have to know where our money is going to come from. How much we can expect, as well as what expenses that same money will be used to meet. Our challenge, our goal, is to stay within our budget. To stay within our budget. Now, to fail to do this, to fail to stay within the budget, and this is problematic, and I don't want to oversimplify this because I know that the needs and the wants of individuals vary from individual to individual and family to family, but to stay within the budget, one's budget means to live a life without the want about which Solomon in Proverbs speaks. Now, we talked about unforeseen circumstances that preclude us from staying within the budget. Among them, of course, are medical expenses. It was frightening to see the statistics related to the number of priests who do not have enough to cover their deductible. I forget what the statistic was, but I think it was something like 1 out of 4 priests don't even have $5,000 to pay a deductible in the eventuality of an emergency medical expense. Another unforeseen want, and this is unforeseen, but it has to do with education, is education debt. It's significant how many people have this debt, and we have to pay that debt back. So there are unforeseen debts and expenses that we have, but I am convinced, and this is our challenge, that with proper planning, it is possible sooner rather than later to have a balanced budget and also to have a reserve for unseen expenses. So how do we go about doing this? How do we go about having a balanced budget? What are the 4 steps to personal budgeting? Now, I'm going to go through these things, and they're really rather elementary, but they are really fundamental. The first thing that we have to do is to create a list of income and expenses. Now, if that is an issue, be certain to have enough income to cover the necessities. And what is of paramount importance for the priest, not only for the priest, but for every person, is to be able to distinguish between necessities and wants. Now, what are our necessities? Our necessities are for food, clothing, shelter, utilities, insurance, etc., etc. What are our wants? You know, the 72-inch flat screen television, the Mercedes-Benz that we might like to drive, you know, the $2,000 set of vestments that, you know, the Kostopoulos Katastima in Greece is selling and that we really find attractive. So we have to create a list of income versus expenses, and then very importantly, stay within that list. Then the second thing we must do is to find extra money to counter the debt that we might have in our life. Now, how do we do this? Well, it was pointed out, and correctly so, to find extra income will necessitate at times our presbyteras to work. Now, interestingly, you know, this is a new trend. This isn't so much, it is generational too, by the way. You know, the generations of presbyteras of my era didn't really work. Most of them were stay-at-home moms, but because of the driving economic situation of today, there are many presbyteras who are working. And we have 43% of our presbyteras, as was revealed by statistics, who are in fact working. So that becomes a source of added income. Priests who are in smaller parishes, there are some. don't ask me their names, but I know one in Pennsylvania, but I've known others through the years, who have to take on a second job. Teaching, for example, or counseling, just to bring in some extra income. Adult children who are staying at home, who have finished their education, they must also be able to contribute to the budget to help us to reach a balanced budget. Now, a second thing that we can do and must do to garner more income is we have to cut expenses. So what are some of the expenses that we can cut? Well, there are many cell plans out there, and the cell phone is one thing. You can shop around and find a cell plan that might cost you $20, $30, $40 less per month. Cable, automobiles. Many times, we pay for our automobile, we lease an automobile, and it can be that we could save significant amount of money if we buy a less costly automobile and make monthly payments that are significantly less than what we are presently paying. The home is another consideration. Now, it used to be, and I don't know what the encouragement is today, that we should never have to spend more than 25% of our income upon the home. That is to say, upon rent, upon the mortgage, upon utilities, upon insurance, etc., etc. I know for a fact that there are clergy who are spending significantly more than that. You need to examine that, because if that is something that you are doing, then you might want to consider downsizing your home, going into a more modest condominium or apartment, or whatever the case might be, and do whatever you possibly can in order to reduce the expenses. The third thing is to create a monthly budget. To create a monthly budget, and what that simply means is it's important because it gives one control over where our money is going. So when we are living within the budget, and if you're like me, you like to be in control. And when we're not in control, we're not happy. And one of the things that we can control and master in our lifetime is the money that we make and the money that we spent. And then finally, and this was pointed out by Father Tom, Father Dimitri, Father Harris, the importance of saving. We cannot emphasize this enough. If we are going to do personal budgeting, we have to come up with a way of saving more of our income. Now, how do we do this? Now, note your list. It's almost silly to look at these things, but they are of paramount importance. Let me talk about bringing lunch from home. This is silly now, but let me talk to you a little bit about this. An average fast food meal at lunchtime costs $7. To bring your lunch from home costs $2. Okay? Let's say we eat out lunch 300 days during the year. 300 days during the year is $2,100 versus $600. The savings is $1,500. You multiply that by 10, just by eating lunch that you've brought from home will save you in 10 years $15,000. Skip lattes. This may seem ludicrous or silly, but I have a Jewish rabbi friend. He goes out for coffee every day, and I join him sometimes. He always has a cappuccino, $5 and $6. And of course, being the Tsinguni that I am, I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll spend $1.89. Now, again, you do the math. $5 versus $2, multiply that by 200. Evaluate your cell plan. Very important. We all have cell phones and we're spending money on that. Now, if you're blessed like me, you have churches that are covering your cell phone, and that's not really problematic. Credit interest payments, significant drain upon our income and upon our money. You have to liquidate credit debt. I don't know how you can do that, but so many people spend their monies and their finances on credit debt, and when they don't have money, they simply they carry without the cash. Keep in mind what my dad said, no cash, no carry. Cook at home, use coupons, shop for insurance, look for sales, take advantage of free entertainment. I can recall when I first got married, I was working at the Archdiocese, Department of Youth. I was making $8,000 a year back then, which probably is about $35,000 today. Had no money to do anything other than pay the rent, pay the subway, and drive to Pennsylvania. What did we do? We'd go to Coney Island, we walk around Kings Plaza Park, we'd go to the Brooklyn Museum, we sought out entertainment that was free. Wherever we go, and this is true in our communities, there's a lot of free entertainment whereby we can save money. And then we go on, get out of cable, stay healthy. That was alluded to earlier today. If we stay healthy, if we work out, if we exercise, if we eat properly, we stay healthy, then we're going to, by God's grace, avoid some unnecessary medical expenses. And then finally, very important, is to have an automatic transfer of money into a savings plan. Don't hesitate to do that. You know, go to your parish council treasurer, have them deduct 5%, 6% of your salary, and have it go directly into your bank, and that is a sure and a safe way of saving. So what can I say in conclusion about personal budgeting? Well, let me state something about parish compensation, by the way. The parish compensation package given to us by Archdiocese, in my opinion, is a relatively generous one. That is to say, if our communities and our parishes meet these guidelines. The reality is that I was very surprised by the statistics of, you know, a number of priests who are making under $60,000, because beginning priests with compensation and insurance and automobile should be making close to $70,000 or $75,000. But the reality is that most of us, not all of us, are making in excess of $75,000 to $100,000 to $125,000 total compensation package. Now, we know that the standard of living varies from one section of the country to the next, but the median income in a city like Nashville, Raleigh, and Birmingham is between $60,000 and $70,000. And I know, and I can speak for myself, that many of us are making far in excess of that. The median income in the Northeast Corridor and places like California, cities like Boston, New York, are close to $80,000 to $90,000. But I know for a fact that many of our brothers are receiving in excess of that. So we have the compensation package, and of course what's important is that our church, through the metropolis and the archdiocese, negotiate the compensation package for us. We should not have to go to our parish councils as beggars, so that they pay us what we need to be compensated in order to maintain a comfortable living. But having said that, because of medical debt, because of student debt, together, we as a clergy brotherhood, these are the initiatives that together we need to engage in. And it was alluded to in our earlier presentation, because we are so focused upon mortar and brick and building things, we need to build the temple of the priesthood and you know, look to organizations such as Leadership 100 to help those priests who have education debt and medical debt, etc., etc. Now, by way of conclusion, and this is on your guideline, let me simply read: discipline is essential to taking control of our finances. I was talking to Father Barnabas earlier, and the reality is that some of us don't want to think in terms of money. You know, we establish a dichotomy between the financial and the spiritual, and, you know, financial considerations for many of us priests, because we are priests, is of secondary importance. It takes sacrifice and hard work to get out of debt, but it is worth it. Once out of debt, we can begin to build our savings. Now, to do this, we have to practice the above-mentioned principles, and if we practice the above-mentioned principles, we are going to get out of debt, and we are going to find that our own sense of peace of mind is going to be enhanced, and our own ability as priests to work effectively within our communities will also be magnified. So that's my presentation on personal financing, and we'll now turn the floor over to Chris Mandelaris. Sir. Do we want to take... Go ahead.
In the example of the lattes and the lunches and things like that, that often in my case, you know, if the only time I can get with people, so to speak, is over lunch or over coffee, how in your ministry have you been able to keep that financially not backbreaking, you know?
No, I think what's important here, and I know this happens with some priests, but not with all, there has to be an understanding with the parish council that when we go out to lunch with parishioners, this is part of our work. It's a business expense, and the parish council, together with the parish, ought to absorb that expense. So if you go out and you have a latte or you have lunch, and it's costing you $10 or $15 or $20, you're buying a parishioner a meal, then my opinion, and I've educated my parish council to understand it, and they agree with it, that the parish pick up the tab, we submit the receipts. That's one way of dealing with it. That's how I would recommend that we deal with it. Okay?
Okay. I know that you were looking forward to talking about accounting last thing of a long day. That's, I remember in school, the fastest way to catch a nap was to go to an accounting class. But as George pointed out in his terrific presentation, this is an area of parish personal and parish budgeting and parish financials where there's a need. This isn't going to make you able to pass the CPA exam. It's not even close. As Father pointed out, this is a 101, or even in the case of what I'm going to cover here, a little less than that. But to help us out, I would like to know by a show of hands, how many of you have taken an accounting or finance class at the college level or above? So keep your hands up just for a second. Okay. And how many of you are active participants in the parish budgeting process? Okay, good. So about 7 of you raised your hands to the first question. I remember a statistic of around 17% of those that were surveyed had taken some sort of accounting class or greater than that. And statistically, I haven't counted the total head count here, but we're probably not too far off from that, maybe at 20% level here. So to those of you that have had an accounting class or more, let me apologize. This is going to be extremely basic, but I think it's important for the other 80% in the room to understand at least the basics. So, Father has talked about personal budgeting. Where we are now is parish budgeting. I'm going to go through my portion of the presentation, and then we'll get Father's perspective from his years of experience in parishes and with parish budgeting. So why do parish budgeting? What's the importance of it? So first, it formalizes the planning process. It forces the parish, the priests, all involved to really study and look ahead for the parish, meaning what are your goals, what are your objectives for your ministries, but also how are you good stewards of the money that the parishioners are sharing with the parish. It reduces emotion-driven decisions. Meaning, if you know what your budget is, you've thought ahead as to how you're going to spend your money in the next year. If something comes up, you can turn back to the budget and say, did we budget for that? If not, and it's not essential, in other words, to put it in the jargon of personal budgeting, it's not a want, then perhaps we should delay it until next year and put it in next year's budget. It forms a basis for control. So again, by having that budget there, as you start to go through the year, it forces the parish council and others to think about, okay, did we budget for it, and are we spending the money and controlling it in a manner that is in accordance with our plan. Increases parishioner involvement. So it varies from parish to parish depending on the size. But the budget may be put together by a combination of a subcommittee of the parish council, a finance committee, the priest, ministry leaders, but you get more parishioner involvement in that budget, and because of that, it can also lead to increased giving. Now, why would you believe that? Yes, sir. Exactly. So for those in the back, the answer, and the father is correct, if they're involved in the budgeting process, they know what the goals and the programs are that were budgeted for, and they were involved in that process, they're apt to then say, okay, I'm going to help in that process and give. Creates confidence in leadership. So there's organization, there's an order to the process, and again, that gives comfort to those givers. It assists in planning for uneven giving. What do we think we mean by that? Yes. Cycle. So within a year, some parishioners, when they pay their stewardship, they may wait till December to pay it all. They may pay half in the middle of the year and half at the end. Some, God willing, pay monthly. We've, at our parish, have been driving that point home. Our expenses come monthly. It'd be nice if at least the stewardship giving matched that. Others, because of the seasonal giving, you might get more donations during Pascha or during Christmas. So if you have a budget and you see that in a particular month the giving was greater than the expenditures, that doesn't mean I have extra money to spend. Because of the budgeting, you realize later in the year I have some expenditures coming, and it might be during a period of the year where historically the giving hasn't been as great, so I need to not spend that money today. It also provides time to save for maintenance. So again, correlation to the personal budgeting. If you're saving for your retirement or you're saving for your children's education in the parish sense, if you know you've got major repairs and maintenance, the parish parking lot's going to need repaving, the roof's going to need replacing, the HVAC systems eventually are going to wear out, you should be thinking ahead and saying, okay, 5 years from now is what our maintenance people tell us it's going to be before we might need to replace. So as part of our annual budgeting process, we need to begin to save for that. So some principles of budgeting. Clearly, you've got a history in your parishes of income and expense. So one would be to base it on what is the estimate that we think of both income and expense we're going to have in the coming year. It should reflect not only operations, so we know we need certain amounts to keep the utilities, the air conditioning, the lights on, the parish priest payroll, other payroll, but what are other objectives? What are our ministries? What are we trying to accomplish? What is our outreach, and what are we going to need? What's that going to cost us? So it's both should be reflective to keep the doors open and the lights on, as well as for growth and for other ministry objectives. Who should be involved? We've said already, not just parish council or subcommittee or finance committee, but priest and lay ministry leaders as well. Every parish probably has somebody with financial expertise. May not be a CPA, might be somebody in the banking industry or the finance area of a corporation. Engage them to assist. It's always good to have that financial expertise as part of the budgeting process. In a couple slides, you'll see we'll talk a little bit more about what do we mean by either top-down budgeting or bottom-up, but that is a principle of budgeting. So now the actual steps in the process. Again, basic worksheets involved. What should be on that worksheet? There should be historical, actual, first and foremost, the line items on the budget should correspond to the line items on your parish's financial statements. They should line up. There should be columns for past year's actuals, 1 or 2 years, so the most recent year that's finished and perhaps the year before that. And then, depending on when you do your budgeting in the year for the next year, you should have at least that year's year-to-date actuals. And then certainly a blank column that'll be your column for where you'll fill in for the next year's budget. Now, this particular sample shows what I just described, But I would argue that I wouldn't do one thing that is done here. If you look closely at the year-to-date column, what month is that? November. In my opinion, way too late to be doing the next year's budget, particularly when you're going to need parish assembly approval of that next year's budget, and it should be done in the fall parish assembly for the next year, not in the winter of the next year's assembly for the year you're already in. So in that case, I would expect most parishes should be doing their budgeting anytime from June up through no later than September, and have a year-to-date column for that in order to have it ready for parish assembly. So again, now let's talk about the top-down approach. That's probably, I would guess, we haven't taken a survey of this, but that's probably the most common approach that's used. Typically, it would be perhaps a smaller parish where the leaders in the parish, i.e. the priests, parish council members, lay leaders, know the parish needs and programs the best, and can start with the income side and then fit the expenses in the process. So this might be a parish where the funds may be a little tight, or you may only see limited growth in your stewardship from year to year. And so you would start with your income. Here's what I know I'm going to make. Again, corresponding to the personal budget, you know what your sources of income are. Now I've got to fit my expenses into that. The bottom-up approach may be used in larger ministry-led parishes, perhaps a larger parish where the income side, there aren't as many constraints on the expected income. So here you might have your ministry leaders submit a budget for their ministry to the finance committee or whoever the committee is that's putting the budget together, and say, here's what we'd like to have in the next year, and here's why. So it isn't just a number, but here's what we want to accomplish with the money that we hope to get in the budget. And so expenses are determined first. And then you look at the income side. So basically, once you've done that exercise, you subtract the expenses from the income, and if income equals or exceeds, then rejoice. If not, in other words, if expenses are still higher than income, so you have a negative number after you've made that subtraction, sharpen your pencil, go back to work, but be careful when you go back to work. The inclination may be to force the income side up in order to offset that negative amount that you ended up because expenses were too high. It's not to say depending on the magnitude of that difference, if it's not that big, and you can identify a fundraiser or some other source of income that is committed to, there's a plan put in place to do it in the next year, somebody says, I'll take that on, and you think it's achievable, then okay, maybe include that fundraiser, and maybe that closes that gap to where you're balanced. But I would dare say in most cases, the sharp pencil has to be used on the expense side to really cut back in order to end up with a balanced budget. Be sure and document the reasons behind the numbers you put in your budget. Now, why do I say that? Besides the fact that, it shows discipline and order, and when you start to get questions by the reviewers of the budget, be they the full parish council or be it at the parish assembly, you can readily show why, if somebody says, gee, why did you raise the electrical utility for next year's expense? You can say, because our local utility has put out a notice that it's going up 5%. Boom. And you've got a ready answer for that. Or if it's on the income, the same reason. Why did income go up or down? So again, there should be documentation behind the budget to support the assumptions that you've used within your budget. evaluating the projected budget. So again, here, there may be a small subcommittee that put it together. You have been engrossed in the details. There most likely may be some things you hadn't thought of or some questions that need to be answered. So that evaluation should take place with a larger group. And so whether the smaller group does it and your full finance committee first reviews it, or if you don't have a finance committee, take it to the full parish council. You're going to need their approval anyway as to put it on the agenda for the parish assembly. So you will have to explain that budget. And when I say you, forgive me, I'm not talking about you, the priest, explaining it. I'm explaining what the lay people should be doing that are engaged in this budget. Again, just trying to educate you on what a good process should be. But have that larger group review it, challenge it, submit it to the parish council. It should be submitted to the parish council for review and approval, and then ultimately submitted to the full parish assembly, because they must, by rules and regulations, approve the following year's budget. So let me pause there from a parish budgeting standpoint and ask Father to lend his words of wisdom from years of that process.
Thank you, Chris. We're going through this exercise because it was pointed out in the earlier presentation that many clergy, not all, but many clergy are not good at managing personal finances or parish finances. And there is an agreement that we need to talk about parish budgeting. So as Chris pointed out, this is Parish Budgeting 101. So I want to just ever so briefly speak to you about the role of the priest in parish budgeting, and present it from a perspective of the cleric. And with the handouts that have been given, there are 3 points that I want to talk about. One, the importance of the priest to the development and the implementation of the budget. Reasons why the priest must be involved in the development of the budget. And the role of the priest in meeting the budget. Have what? Yep. Sorry. I didn't think it over. Yeah. There we go. Thank you, Father. Now, in speaking about these things, allow me to emphasize an important point. It is one that I know that many of you can make and or hopefully will make in the future. It finds an expression through the following aphorism, maxim, the statement, and it's on your handout. I do not claim to be a financial wizard, and I do not claim to be a financial wizard, but I try to know enough not to be naive. So what is so very important for us priests is not to be naive when it comes to budget and financing. Now, the importance of the priest in development and implementation of the budget is attested to by our uniform parish regulations. Whenever we do strategic planning in the parish, I always go to the UPRs. We do not have to give a mission statement for the parish because it is there and it has been there for years. And the mission statement is found in Article 15 that reads, the diaconia of the parish will include preaching and teaching the gospel, sanctifying the faithful through worship and sacraments, adding to our membership through instruction, baptism, and chrismation, engaging in educational and philanthropic activities, and edifying our faithful in the Orthodox Christian ethos. George pointed out that the priests are the first responders. What's interesting is not one of these statements within the mission statement can be accomplished without the priest. The church is the clergy and the laity together. But I submit to you, as spiritual as this mission statement is, it cannot be accomplished without money. It cannot be accomplished without planning. It cannot be accomplished without a budget. Now, it is emphasized, of course, by the UPRs that the priest is the spiritual head of the church. And one of the reasons why many of us don't like getting involved with budgets is because we believe that there is a dichotomy that ought to exist in the church between the priest and the parish council. The parish council will take care of administration and finances, and many of our priests, many of our brothers say, we'll take care of the spiritual. That is erroneous. That is false. The Uniform Parish Regulations clearly state that a parish council exists to assist the priest in the administration and in the affairs and ministries of the parish. So Chris spoke about the budgeting process that needs to be pursued. I hope you were paying attention because there's nothing more that I need to add to what he has already stated. So the question, of course, is, how do we go about preparing this budget? And what's so very important, our role is to involve the ministry heads in our parish in the actual planning of the budget. Bring together our Goya leaders, our OCF leaders, our religious education leaders, speak with them before we go to committee in the preparation of the budget to find out what their goals are for the coming year. Now, not only do these ministry leaders contribute to the establishment and the putting together of a budget, but what we do by encouraging them is we assist them in planning for the coming year in accomplishing their ministries. So the question, of course, is why is the priest important in the development of a budget? And I cite 5 reasons. The one is he is the spiritual and educational head of the church. He must be involved to ascertain that these aspects of the church's mission are accomplished. 2, achieving parish goals do not happen by chance. Achieving parish goals takes a plan. Budgets help the church plan. Chris pointed that out. Money is needed to implement the plan, and the priest is important to the raising of that money because we are, believe it or not, whether we're willing to accept that responsibility or not, the stewardship chairpersons of our communities. It is our responsibility to be the ones who preach and teach the importance of stewardship, both through our preaching and our teaching ministries and through our ministry of the monthly bulletin or the weekly bulletin that we put out. 3, when goals are budgeted, they can be used to evaluate performance of employees and the effectiveness of programs. Now, it's clearly stated again in the Uniform Parish Regulations that we are to be the overseers of the ministries and the programs of our parish. But it is also pointed out that all personnel employed by the parish will be employed. This, by the way, we are not part of the personnel. We are not employed, and it's been stated many times. We are assigned by the bishop. We are not the employees of the community, but everybody else is. And we are a significant part of that, of the employment process. We have a say as to who is hired and who is discharged. And we have to give our input because don't let parish council members tell you otherwise. We are a significant part of the parish council, and I don't know how it is in your ministries, but there is never, ever, 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 ever a parish council meeting, an official parish council meeting, that can take place or should take place without the presence of the priest.
Also, your also says that the parish council is a ministry, and all ministries are under the supervision of the priest.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So again, we are the CEO, if you will, the chief executive, the spiritual, and I would add also the administrative head of the parish. There is no such thing as the president of the parish. President of the parish. He is the president of the parish council. He presides over the meetings of the parish council. Budgeting overseen by priests helps facilitate strategic plan implementation by allocating resources to church priorities. And finally, one of the tasks of the priests, as defined by the UPRs, is to work to maintain unity of the parish. And being involved in the planning of the budget is important to helping us maintain unity of the parish, because the reality is, my experience over 41 years of priesthood is that within parishes there are oftentimes turf wars. Who is going to be getting money to do what? And of course, as persons who are overseers of the programs and the ministries, we have to have an input in who gets what, and also do whatever we possibly can to resolve whatever differences may exist between ministry leaders, parish council persons, etc., etc. So finally, what is the role of the priest in meeting the budget? Very simply, education. We educate ourselves. This is what we are doing today and what we hopefully will do in the future. This is why Chris is here, why George is here, why I'm here, to begin the education process. And also our role in the terms of the budget is to educate others as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, please.
And I don't know how many of my brothers, my entire professional career has been in the church. So for those of you who have been in the for-profit world, obviously we don't sell widgets. So in that discussion of top-down versus bottom-up, when you're talking about the income side of the church versus the what we really want to be doing versus what we can afford to be doing kind of conversation. Shy of this is how much money we always collect. What success, if any, has anybody had in the real conversation of the true growth of the budget where we need to be? You know, that whole, why does the budget keep getting bigger every year? Well, because we're trying to build a bigger something, to grow the church or whatever. I mean, if I'm a tire business and I want to grow, naturally my budget grows with it, but I'm selling more tires to, you know, so in that world, how do we massage, how do we work with our parish councils in that conversation of, again, you know, are we always going to increase the youth budget? Are we always going to increase this? How do we have those conversations with a bunch of people who are in the for-profit world, as opposed to they're coming into the nonprofit world, you know, organizationally? Is that a sensible question?
It is. Let's hear from some of your brothers first, and then I'll give you the lay perspective. Sure.
The other side.
Sure.
Just on the same line what you said, Father Athanasius. I remember several years ago, even in some of our stewardship seminars, was mentioned that we should not be focusing too much on the income side of the budget because that limits the growth and the dreams of the ministries of the parish. And then I shared that sometime in my parish with the parish council and people working on the budget, and they were looking like, why? So it was.
I want to add something to my question. Do you mind?
Sure.
The other part of the question is, and I'm sure all of us have faced this, the insurance is going up, the utilities are going up, the salary compensation is going up. So therefore, since we only ever make this much in candles and trays, something's got to give. And of course, we all know that's the Goya and the Sunday school and things like that. So in that conversation of budgetary planning, I want to add that as the example of what.
Okay, Father Anthony.
I wanted to ask, how much do you communicate, how much transparency do you have with the entire parish on a monthly basis? Because a negative thing or a positive thing is to say, here's where we come in this month, this is what we budget for. Does anyone do that? Is that a smart thing to do, or does that make us look crazy and incite fear?
Okay, before we answer that question, let's go back to Father Hous's answers for his.
If I can answer Father
Sure.
House in there, before I would give a brief, I managed two courses in four countries, and basically what it was you have your average ticket, they call it average ticket. If you're in a store and your average ticket is $10 and you can increase it to $15, then you've increased your sales by 50%. So in the same way, we have stewardship. If we can get the people involved in the process or ask them, what ministries do you want? What do you want to happen in the church? They say A, B, C, D. Well, this is how much it's going to cost. And this is where our average stewardship is. And this is where we are. So for us to achieve this is where we need to be. So that means that maybe you need to put an extra dollar away every day for the church, for the ministry, which increases your stewardship $365 per steward. So, I mean, these little things like that actually bring the stewardship up, allows us to go ahead and like you said, meet those increasing needs. But the people have to be involved. They have to be have to know, there has to be transparency, and this is how much everything that you're asking for as a parish is going to cost the community, and this is how much our average stewardship is, and this is what it equals out to.
Okay, yes, back.
I think a couple of things. One is that what I'm going to try to do is try to educate who we're supposed to do within the stewardship. When that when the true stewardship, true sense of stewardship, a lot of times persons are accept what I've done. It's reminding them. For example, when we look at stewardship, it's not really just for the budget, I think stewardship. A whole other stuff. But really quickly, you're talking about right off the top, one thing too is that when it comes to sometimes there are teachable moments. In Knoxville we had the typical conclusion or came out of something we done about $800 because of the amendment. We have about $800 on the bank account. Parish proportions stepped up. And stewardship ended up being much higher than it ever been before that year. By the time we were done. Much higher than before. We really were the next two cannot put our stewardship at that level. We're not going to take it out showing it the next year. We used it Jack Heffel, one of those periods. And one thing that we try to do, and I did myself at Crash Camp as well, is to point to people that clearly there's more than we do as a personal experience. And again, try to emphasize the stewardship, pure stewardship teaching in that perspective. And this is fortunate because other than in 1 year we continue to go up, and the stewardship next year. And 1 year first we go to pond, right? And then came back again the following year. But again, like last year we did pretty well. We increased more than we were before, other than what we did.
Okay, so a couple of thoughts here, and we'll take some more hands. To me, and our strategic planning for the metropolis opened my eyes to a lot of things, but I think two things that hit home to your point, Father. One is parish strategic planning. So that would get your parish, more of your parishioners involved in what do we want our parish to be? Where do we want to be 5 years, a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? What is it going to take to get there? And that creates that planning process, engages parishioners in that, and also includes the concept of, okay, it's going to get there, this is what we need to do. And part of that, what we need to do, is be able to raise the funds. And then marry that with a good review of bringing in for a stewardship program. So again, it sounds like a selfless plug, but we're beginning in our mini faith forums tomorrow to talk about both parish strategic planning and show you what great work's been put into that, as well as a new comprehensive stewardship delivery program. And basically, both those things cause the parishioners, it opens their eyes. The young lady in the back there that said, George, your presentation opened my eyes today to something I didn't know about. That's what we're trying to do, is open eyes. And that, to me, also gets to the answer for Father Anthony, which is the question of, do any of us talk more frequently than two parish assembly meetings about where we are in our budget, where we are in our financial situation? And the answer is, and I can't speak for all the parishes, but I know some parishes will, on a monthly basis, when they communicate to their parishioners, communicate key elements of what transpired that month from a financial statement point of view. Not necessarily entire financials for the month, but key elements. Okay, our total income, or maybe key elements, stewardship and everything else amounted to X, our expenditures amounted to Y, and guess what? We were over or under. So they continue to be informed about it. They should be informed about it. And so find a way to accomplish that. I don't think there's one right or wrong way to do that. But the more you can engage your parishioners in what should our parish be with the priest's guidance, and how do we get there, part of that how do we get there is going to involve money. In our parish we said, okay, there are certain expenditures we have for like yard maintenance. There are certain things we as parishioners can do for our parish as opposed to paying someone else to do. So now we have a yard ministry. So instead of having that expenditure every month, we have a group of men and women that are engaged in caring for the yard. So, yes, Father.
I just wanted to mention two things. The first one is, I think it's extremely important to keep our parishioners informed. As you mentioned, for example, we do the expenditure and how much we take in every bulletin, every single Sunday, so they know how much we spend and so forth, just to keep transparency. But secondly, I also think it has a lot to do with changing the mentality of people. For example, for the longest time, we had a few of our parishioners who wanted to do 2 trays, and we changed it. So it's 1 tray, and whatever we collect, it goes for God, and hopefully eventually we'll move completely away from that and rely on the stewardship. But also, there's another part of this as well, that there are a lot of young people or couples who are coming into the church, and stewardship, the way I present it to them, is not about how much they can give to the church in money. I present it to them in their talent and then whatever they can afford to give. And we don't have a minimum or a maximum in our church. We believe it's something that has to be from the heart. And it's been very efficient. We have had a lot of new families donate, and some of them, they are doing phenomenal, not only on stewardship, but also got involved in the board and using their talent to increase. So I think the mentality has a lot to do with it as well.
Yes.
To address the one issue, last year they were doing something that I thought was horrendous. Every Sunday, somebody was standing in the back of the church with a chart saying, "We are down this amount of money. We need this money." And so they were having someone in the back of the church. I said, "No more." I said, "It didn't work." This year, what we're doing is we're saying we have collected X amount of money. Our goal is this. And at the halfway point of the year, we are over halfway to our goal in meeting our stewardship this year. The other thing is we priests have to be the example of giving our stewardship when you pass the tray. I can probably talk about that. And that way they see that we are contributing as well. And every year I ask them to increase $5. I said, but Dad and I are doing the same thing, join us. So, I mean, there are ways of doing it, but also, and not that mine is anything magical or whatever, it's just something that is working for us.
Thank you, Father. So we can keep on schedule here, if you don't mind. Let's go through the next section, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end of that. So again, let me remind you, it says the basics for a good reason. We're not going to make accountants out of you through this. And trust me, if they get the program working at the seminary, it's going to be more in depth than what we're going to have time to cover in 20 minutes. So, and the financials I sent around, we'll speak to them in just a second. Parish financials consist of, in accounting terms, a balance sheet, but in parish terms or not-for-profit terms, it's also known as statement of net assets, statement of financial position, may have other names. Again, accounting terms, an income statement, also known as statement of activity or statement of revenue and expenses. And again, there may be other names that you might use in your parish. So the statement of net assets, or the balance sheet, is a snapshot of where your parish is at a point in time. Could be the end of the month, could be the end of a quarter, could be the end of a year. It's basically, in essence, what you own and what you owe. So within the statement of net assets, or the balance sheet, the assets, again, is the what you own portion. It could be cash, buildings, iconography, etc. The liabilities, what you owe, mortgages, other debt, and then the balancing figure is basically the retained earnings that cause the balance sheet to balance. Parish assets, if you stop and think about it, there's also a time element involved. That time element is what you own, but also classified as to its lifespan or its liquidity. So current assets are those things that within a year you can convert. So cash obviously is convertible at any time. CDs that are less than 12 months in maturity, again, are current assets. There may be other short-term investments of less than a year. Long-term assets like land, buildings, again, iconography, furniture, fixtures, and the like, harder to liquidate, therefore termed long-term assets. Now, in both categories, you may have restricted and unrestricted. Unrestricted meaning can be spent for any purpose. Restricted may be a donation somebody gave, maybe it's part of their will, a major amount that said, this money is to be used for X, and that causes it to be restricted and to be used only for whatever that X is. Parish liabilities, we said, typically are mortgages or other loans. The statement of activity or the income statement reflects a parish's revenue and expenses for a period of time. If you recall, the balance sheet was at a point in time. This is over a period of time. Can be for the month just ended, the quarter just ended, in other words, a year to date, or it could be the entire year. It reflects actual income and expenditures for that period, and I assume most of you are on a cash basis, so whatever cash came in during whatever period is being measured, month or year, or cash that's gone out the door, expenditures for that period. And it's also the document on which you should be comparing your actual for the year to the budget, which we talked about before, that you prepared the year before for that year. Income consists of everything from stewardship, candles, memorials, trays, can be seasonal donations, Christmas, Pascha, special fundraiser income, or other income. Expenses, and again, refer to the handout that you got here at the end. That is a sample financial. We've whited it out to protect the innocent here, and also whited out certain key things like salary and archdiocese commitments, so you can't figure out who this is. And by the way, that's just an example. Your parish, depending on its size, may have a larger list of assets and liabilities and income and expenditures, but the point is this was just to show you both the columns that are there for actual for the year or for the period that's described there, as well as the budget. Now keep in mind that budget column is only useful if it's prorated for the period that that income statement's reflected for. It does no good to have a 5-month income statement of actual and put the year's budget beside it, because hopefully that budget will be way higher than what that 5-month period is. So most people will prorate the budget. So if it's the 5 months for the year, they'll take 5/12ths of the budget and lay it next to it to see how you're doing. If you're extremely sophisticated and you can budget by month, because you know you go into the detail of what your income, you know what your income is for a particular month, then you'll have those in even more depth. Of course, salaries and benefits, archdiocese commitment, other expenses here, ministry expenses, the fundraiser expenses in order to put on the event that the fundraiser income is for on the income line, outreach expenses, other expenses. So, yes, Father.
Regarding the priest's salary, how do you feel about putting the priest's salary in the ministries?
I'm sorry,
Put the priest's salary under the category of ministries, so it sends a message that the priest is part of the staff.
Okay, so the question is, how do I feel about putting the priest's salaries under ministries? Is it still broken out as priest salary? It just happens to be in the ministry category? Okay, so you're not burying it into something. Yeah. It does, and I don't think there's any prohibition against it. So unless anyone knows of a prohibition, I don't. And I think the key, though, is that it's clear of what all is in that number, because you've got the salary, but then there may be a piece that belongs to other expenses, car allowance, that sort of thing. So I don't know that you want to have it spread all over the place, but yes.
On the same side, a tradition that they've had at St. Mark for years is that they just bundle all salaries into one for the parish assembly.
Right.
So that it says salaries, insurance, et cetera.
Right.
And then the overall numbers, they're not specified.
Yep.
However, as we're preparing the budget, the parish council, they're all aware, it's very broken down, but for the overall,
Yep.
just not the spark. How do you feel about that? That's been very effective.
I think you should continue to do what works in your parish, okay? This isn't, the handout that you received or anything I'm saying out here isn't to say this is the way to do it. It's really just to help educate a little bit on what key line items are, but continue to do what works best in your local parish. Okay, I thought it important as part of talking about parish budgeting, but more importantly, parish financials, to talk about good financial practices. And again, the reason we're speaking about it to you, the clergy, is not because it's your responsibility to educate, let me rephrase that, it's not your responsibility to implement it. But in the handout of the slides, I would suggest that you take this home with you and talk to your treasurer, your parish council president, whomever, and see if they are doing these things. So it's not your responsibility to implement it, but it is for your benefit and for the benefit of the parish to implement these practices, to avoid fraudulent activity, embezzlement, other acts that they're not 100% preventable, but you're in a much better position if you put these practices in place. But there are other reasons besides the bad reasons to do this. So why have them? So the concepts of honesty, truthfulness, and mutual trust. Certainly, we want to be able to look at our brothers and sisters in Christ and believe that they're trustworthy and would do the right thing. And it is a sensitive issue for volunteers. And we all know that. I know that firsthand from having served on parish councils. But think of it in terms of not just protecting, in this case, the parish, but also protecting the reputations of those that volunteer to do the work of the parish. So what I tell my treasurer on my parish council when I'm saying we need to implement this is to protect your reputation and mine from false accusations. So let's talk about some of the measures that can be taken and how they can help protect those reputations, but at the same time protect the organization. So, some good general practices. We'll talk about general practices. We'll talk about some specific for receipts and some specific for disbursements. So, your parish should have a accounting and payroll policies and procedures manual. Why? There's turnover, and it's voluntary turnover. Your parish council turns over, your treasurer turns over. Don't start from scratch every year. If that manual is there, it can be pulled off the shelf. The incoming person can know what the proper procedures are, as will your bookkeeper if you have a paid bookkeeper, because he or she may not be there forever. So again, having those policies and procedures creates good order. You're required, all of us are required as parishes to have an annual audit, be it internal or external, and that report go to the parish assembly and be presented to the parish assembly. Employees, so when you hire that bookkeeper, if you have one, again, if it's in your policy and procedure manual, then it doesn't make the parish council president, the priest, or the parish council look like the bad guy when you go to hire him and say, by the way, we're going to have to do a background check. It's required. Okay, so that's part of your policy. But that is a good thing to do in today's day and age, as well as look at, your treasurer should be looking at the insurance policy to make sure that your employees, particularly those that handle money, are bonded. The most important measure that can be taken is segregation of duties, and we'll point to what those are. So, good practices for receipts. Always have two people involved in the collection and counting of cash and checks. Saying it differently, you might have two people passing the tray, and then in some parishes they may hand it off to one person who goes back in the office and counts it by themselves. Not a good thing for that person or for the parish. I wouldn't want to be, I don't go do that by myself for fear that somebody sees Chris go into the room by himself, count the money. Accusations could happen no matter how honest and trustworthy an individual I am, so having two people there assists from that standpoint. Any checks that come in, and again, I'm telling you this just as educational and something to pass on for your treasurer and your parish councils to learn from. Checks should be restrictively endorsed. In other words, on Sundays, count the money, we have the stamp, we immediately restrictively endorse it for deposit only, St. Mark's Greek Orthodox Church. At least that adds a level of protection until that check gets deposited. Having a standard form for recording the amounts, type of donations, and signed and dated by the two counters for that Sunday or whatever the count is for. And receipts deposited promptly. So we shouldn't throw the bank bag in the drawer and sometime during the week somebody's going to take it to the bank. No, somebody from the parish council, preferably treasurer or one of the check signers, should be carrying that and preferably putting it in on Sunday in the overnight deposit. Yes?
On the checks, is it only the treasurer that's allowed to count checks because of the relationship to stewardship?
No, is the short answer. Normally people give a check and the bottom put stewardship or whatever. That doesn't tell you how much Chris pledged for the year. That just tells you that Chris gave X dollars towards that pledge. We do restrict who has access, who enters the information into the system that accumulates how much we may have given compared to what we pledged. But no, that shouldn't restrict it to just one, the treasurer looking at those checks. Deposit slips in standard form. Okay, so here's segregation of duties. Your bookkeeper should not be the one that counts the money, takes it to the bank and deposits it, and also enters it into the system. That's the segregation should come between counting and depositing and entering into the books and records. Okay, again, not something you need to worry about, but something I would take and make sure that that's tell your treasurer to go through and make sure this is being done. Making sure the bank reconciliations, all of them for all the accounts, are done timely, monthly, signed and dated, and reviewed by someone not doing the reconciliation. For the disbursement side, blank checks, whether computer checks or manual checks, keep them in a secure location, meaning locked up. Should be supported by proper documentation, both at the time it's done, but also kept for the year, because that audit that's going to take place at the end, one of the things they ought to be doing is looking at a sample of those checks that were written in the underlying documentation to make sure it was done for legitimate purposes. Again, protecting the individuals here is the way to go with this, but it also protects the organization. All checks should have required 2 signatures. You have to work that out with your bank and tell them that, and then they obviously have to make sure it's the proper check signer. Yes, Father?
So on that one, I have heard several banks and bankers tell me that there is no bank that's going to care how many signatures are on that check when it actually comes across the desk. So is that more of just an internal control at that point? I mean, give you a perfect example. I was handed a check that I was bringing with me here to turn in, and the bookkeeper said, don't worry about the second signature, the bank won't check it anyway.
Right.
I, of course, got the second signature because I demand I'm not going anywhere with a single signature. Right. But, you're in the business. How accurate is that statement?
So there's a legal element to that question that I can't answer. But what I can tell you is, at least with our bank, we went to them, and they are aware and have in their records that these checks require 2 signatures. So at least if a check gets signed by one and cashed, and there was a problem with it, we have at least an avenue to go back to them and say, hey, this is not the arrangement we have with your bank. Now, beyond that, it's the lawyers. But on the flip side of it, on our side, to your point, Father, yes, I tell you, it's not my problem if the bank happens to cash the check with only one signature, but our policy is 2 signatures. Again, I don't want it going there with just mine on there. Yes, sir.
A couple of years ago, our secretary would get up from her desk, go to the restroom, go get a glass of water, and our caretaker was going in and stealing checks from different areas.
Right.
Towards the parish council president's name, only one signature, and cashed about $10,000 worth of checks. We were able to recover all that money because the 2 signatures were not on there, and so now we're just waiting for the guy to go,
Prosecute. Right. Right. Father.
In my old parish in Kentucky, the bank would hold those checks and notify us that we were
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that that's a universal. They may be claiming that, but I'm looking at the legal counsel in the back, but at least you have an argument, a good argument that this was our arrangement and you didn't follow it. Yes, sir.
Is the second signature anybody in the parish?
No.
Council?
No. So.
And are they liable, without knowing any of the details about what they're signing, they're not going to know stewardship, they're not going to know bills, are they liable?
So they ought to be an authorized check signer. So at the beginning of the year, parish council's got to decide who are the authorized check signers for our parish. I can tell you in our parish, it's the officers. So president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. So there are 4 authorized check signers in our, we have an assistant treasurer, so there are 5. Now, partially because, we're spread all over, others are working, you want to make sure you always have 2. But it's those 5, it's got to be 2 of those 5, okay? So it's got to be an authorized check signer, it's got to be those 2. The liability side, when you're saying liable, we all have a fiduciary responsibility because we're handling money. Again, a good reason to have good financial controls in place. Again, I want to protect my reputation as well as the parishes. I think I don't know about when you say liability, you're signing checks on behalf of the parish. If you've done something illegal, in other words, if you've written it to your brother-in-law and it's not a legitimate, then yes, you're liable for that act. Yes, Father.
Is there a archdiocese requirement?
To do what? To no, not that I'm aware of. I'm telling you that it's a good financial practice to do, and my recommendation and strong urge is that you do it. I'm not staying here representing His Eminence or the Chancellor and telling you must do it. I'm just saying it's a good financial practice. Okay. Okay. So I'm. Well, yeah, so let's back up a step. At the last president's meeting we had in Atlanta, where the new presidents come in annually for that event, the chancellor asked me to give a larger presentation. You just got a few of the slides here on this very topic. So there's a message being sent when the chancellor is saying, presidents, treasurers, you're going to come to this meeting and this is one of the topics that's going to be covered. I guess, let me think about why you may be asking this. If you go back and your treasurer or your parish council president say, I don't want to do that, we can maybe talk about an educational process to help them understand better why it's important for their reputation to do this, to protect their... Okay. No, I understand. I understand that. Point taken. Never sign a blank check. Somebody says, hey, I got to go to buy some supplies. Go ahead and get 2 signatures, hand it to me. I'll bring the receipt and the check. Never. Again, bookkeeper, segregation of duties. Whoever's putting, whether it's receipts in or disbursements in, should not be an authorized check signer. This is one that I'm going to highlight in the next presentation. Everybody, let's stop 1 second. Focus on this. The priest should not be a check signer. Not that you want to be either. I'm just saying, don't let them talk you into it because you happen to be there every day. Okay? Yes, Father?
Can you go back to that never sign a blank check idea?
Yeah.
Which obviously is a good thing. I have had, not necessarily my current situation, but in my former situation, I would try and institute here's your approval form, here's your this,
yep.
And then the check gets cut waiting for signature. And I always got this pushback. Why are you cutting all these checks? I'm going to sign them, and it's almost as if they didn't. There's this myth that just because the bookkeeper gives you a check ready to be signed, that money has somehow been spent. In other words, do you see any problem in this process of these checks where in this approval process, the ordering of toilet paper may have been already approved 2 weeks ago. The bill is due because it's a 30-day bill, so the bookkeeper prepares this check, and it's now sitting in the drawer to pay the toilet paper company, but there's no signatures on it yet, right?
So there's some parishes, small ones, where we don't have a full-time bookkeeper. He or she's only there a day or two a week. So in that instance, they'll look through what needs to be cut. They'll cut the checks, print the checks, attach the support. It goes into a folder in a locked file cabinet, awaiting signature. That's not a blank check. Blank check is the signature's there, is the opposite of that. Signature there, but as long as it's filled out but not signed, somebody tries. No, well, there's a risk, but it's not. It's one that you can again go back to the bank on, because if somebody falsely signs that, forges mine and another check signer's, and cashes it, you have recourse there. Okay. Okay. Finishing up here. Not be a check signer. Shouldn't write checks to cash. Okay. Again, you might have a petty cash fund. That's got cash in it, but do not write checks. Or I'm not talking again you, but again, good practices for your treasurer and your parish council is not to write checks to cash.
How do you handle petty cash?
Well, in that case, you are, the petty cash box, when it's empty, should have a bunch of receipts in it that support. If you had $500 in there, you should have $500 of receipts. So through your documentation, you would in that instance, I would make an exception and say, fine, I got to write $500, but it's written. It's a petty cash, right? It's cashed, it's put in, and you've got the trail there that shows what it was for. But outside of that, thank you, Father, I would stop there. Okay, we've run through quickly, or at least it seems quickly. Again, neither this session nor any of the preceding ones that dealt with parish financials or parish budgeting means that's your responsibility, other than as the leader of the parish, to ensure that your parishioners, your parish council, the appropriate folks are going through the right order and keeping good order and following good financial practices. So any final questions before we end? Yes, sir.
Sorry. Something I need to think about, not for today, but a future presentation, is online banking.
Fair point. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
The right to look at the checkbook.
Do parishioners have the right to look at the checkbook? Yeah. Do parishioners have the right to look? Well, I would say outside of salaries and benefits, because that involves personal information, I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, the first question I have is why. if you've got good financial practices, you've got good leadership, you've got a transparent budgeting and financial reporting, but what I would say to them is, okay, I'd like to understand why, because we got all these good practices, and by the way, we had this independent audit group that is going to do that and make sure it was for good reason. So I would like to understand better why they want to look at it. Yeah. Right, but if they have good financial practices, and I don't disagree that they have the right to do it, but I guess my first recourse to that question would be, that's why we have an annual audit, that's why we have these good financial. That committee is an elected audit committee by the parish assembly that you voted for. I'm sorry, I don't mean you, but that the person is voted for that wants to see it. They're your representatives. Go to them and say, look, I'm concerned in this area. Can you do a little more work in that area when you're doing the audit? They're your representatives.
Because people come to us
Yeah.
and ask us this, and I have to have the correct answer.
Sure. Yes, Mark. Yeah.
What we do,
Father Mark.
people have that, we'll say, even if they have a parish assembly or whatever, specifically, we'll say, please make an appointment, come on in, we'll be glad to sit down with your folks, with our treasurer and our secretary, and you can see whatever you want. Most times, they'll say, that's okay. Sometimes they're right. It's open.
Yeah.
Even the salaries technically is open, even though we don't throw them out there.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, thank you, fathers.
Fathers, thank you so much for attending. Awesome. If you would like to apply for the grant, 10K it's up to 10K.
Yes, Father. Sure.